Hi, this is Joe from eleaseagreement.com, and today we're going to fill out a month-to-month lease agreement. Now, just to start off, a month-to-month lease agreement is an agreement between a landlord and a tenant, a person who owns property to someone who's looking to rent property, and the month-to-month is has no set date where it ends. The lease just keeps on going until either the tenant or landlord gives 30 days written notice on what the other one has to do, whether it's get evicted, if one wants to pay less rent, or if one wants to pay more rent. What you do is you just keep sending notice to one another. So that's basically what a month-to-month lease agreement is, but let's fill this thing out. Number one is this legal document represents the lease agreement beginning on, and we'll just say January 1st, 2013. Landlord and tenant may modify or terminate this lease agreement anytime by giving how many days notice? Most of the time it's 30. I mean, we put it in here because some people like to maybe give 60 or 90, but the standard is 30, so I would just recommend putting that in there at any time. This lease agreement is between, we'll just write in, it's in a corporation called Landlord Inc. With a mailing address of, we'll just do 90 Alton Road, which is our office, Miami Beach, Florida, 33139. Tenant, I'll say his name is Joe Schmo. But typically you write obviously the tenant's name in here. Agrees to lease premises located at, we'll say right next to our office. 92 Alton Road, Miami, Florida. Zip code 33139. This is just says for only residential use, and landlord agrees to include the furnishings and appliances as described. If you have a lot of things, then I would suggest just writing C addendum, and then listing all your, if it's a furnished place, couches, everything else. But if it's empty, obviously you just leave this blank. If there are common areas, this is most of the time used in inner city. If there's a restriction on the common areas, like you have to always wear shoes in common areas. I mean, it could be anything. Sometimes landlords can get carried away and say, you know, only bring groceries through in the back door and all that stuff. Again, if there are a lot of restrictions, you just do the same thing up here and just say see addendum. Alterations, tenant may or may not make alterations. Alterations are basically the standard, you know, can the tenant change the color of the paint on the wall, change the room around, redo the kitchen. I doubt that the tenant would be doing any of these things, but if you decide that the tenant can do it, you just click this. Otherwise, he's going to have to get your permission. This is another big one, pets. Can the tenant have pets? I know right now with this recession going on, landlords are becoming more and more lenient and clicking this box, but it's all totally up to the landlord. And then this box is just for if there's, say you don't allow tenants, but there's a, don't allow pets, but the tenant is blind and has a blind seeing dog, then you just fill in the tenant would fill in exactly the conditions why he has to have an animal. You write in all the minor children in here so that everyone is accounted for. And this box is for occupancy by guests. Say you have a guest coming up, he wants to spend the vacation with you. The landlord will write in how many days guests are allowed to stay in the property. This is where we get into rent. We'll just say that the rent is $500. payable to Landlord Inc. They're due on the, we'll say, 1st of every month. Beginning on the, we'll say, January 1st, 2013. All rental payments shall be sent to our office. But if you want, a lot of buildings have a drop box where the tenants can pay. And if there's another way that you want not sent to your office, you can just write, drop in manager's office, if that's something that's available to them. But any kind of special requests can be put in here if you do not want the tenant to send it to you. Next is for the period, the move-in date. This is if the tenant's going to be moving in early. Say he wants to move in 4 days before his lease, then he would have to pay most of the time a prorated rent amount, which is basically if he moves in 4 days early, you just divide the rent by 30 days and times whatever that is by 4 because of the 4 days that they moved in early. Most landlords will let you in for free or a little early, but right now when landlords are scraping for every nickel and dime, you just never know. And down here we're going to have, typically, if you're in especially an urban area, you're going to have security deposits, last month rent. This is just if, say the person has bad credit and you require that they have to have rent in advance of, say, 4 or 6 months. You'd click this. If they have a pet deposit, if they have pets, I highly advise getting a pet deposit so that you can have a little money to pay for the scratching that a cat may do or the strange smell that pets sometimes can leave behind. Or any other deposit that you want, you can click here. This is just how many days is the tenant going to have to wait after the lease ends to get their deposits back. Most states have a requirement that's 30 days, but if for some reason, like in the state of New York, there's no requirement, and the landlord can write 90 days in here if he wants. So you just want to make sure that you're going to get your money back at a decent time, and don't let the landlord get carried away with this one. This is late charges. The landlord can either charge a fee, it's flat, or charge a percentage. You also want to watch out here because most states have a requirement on how much you can charge a tenant for late fees. You can't charge anything ridiculous in most states. So I would just do the charge the tenant a flat fee and $25 for every due date that it's late. Utilities, what is the tenant going to be responsible for? Most of the time the landlord pays for 2 out of the 5 of these, but I've seen leases where the landlord doesn't pay for any of these. So you just click in here on which ones the landlord or the tenant is going to be responsible for, and it's easy as that. We'll just say that the tenant is going to be responsible for his electricity, internet, and cable, and we'll take care of the water and the heat here. And then obviously you got other, just in case there's like parking or some other fee that's involved. Subletting, this just says the tenant cannot agree to sublet the property. He has to get your permission first before it gets rented out to somebody else. Maintenance just says the landlord has to keep everything up to date and that the tenant has to keep his property clean. Landlord's access, this is just non-emergency entrance to the property. What it all spells out, what the landlord can go in and how much notice he has to give. Most of the time it's 24 to 48 hours before they can go in your property for a non-emergency entry. Prohibited acts by the landlord just says basically you can't change the locks on you, among other things. This just speaks about defaulting. So if you pay your rent late and the landlord accepts your rent, then the landlord can't come after you and say that you violated the lease. The lease remains in effect. Likewise, if you notify the landlord of a leak and he doesn't fix it until a month, but he does finally fix it, and you agree to stay in there and not break the lease, then in both cases the lease would stay valid. Possession, this just talks about how the landlord has to give you the property during that whole year. And if there are any notices that the tenant wants to make to the landlord, this is the address that he'll send any and all notices. So the landlord wants to make sure to put their address in here. And some states require that the landlord disclose a few things. Like I know in New Jersey, there's a wetlands. If the property has any wetlands on it or has been flooded, they have to notify the tenant. And some other states out in the Midwest do the same thing. But some of them can be kind of quirky, so you want to make sure that your state that you have all the required disclosures for your state. Otherwise, your lease will actually be not even existent. So you really want to make sure on this end of it. Additional addendums, say there's just something quirky that's not in this lease that you want to have spelled out, you want to have it here. And I mean, that could be anything like storage, if there's some storage that the tenant can use somewhere else, to parking situation. It can be anything pretty much. And this just gives you legal jargon, what everything means, the tenancy time. And we go down to the real meat and potatoes, which is the landlord's printed name, landlord's signature, tenant's printed name, tenant's signature. And once this thing is signed, it is legally in effect. Down here, if there's a real estate agent or broker involved, they put it here so that they're protected on getting a commission. But that is how you fill out a month-to-month lease agreement.